doing, it's really beneficial to the soil. It's a great way to sequester carbon, to relax the land from the chemicals that are being used on, the other crops. What are some of the other advantages that you explain to people and why they should begin to integrate hemp into their farming operations?
Well, I think that, there's enough information now, and I think by and large, most farmers understand the value of crop rotation, but it's the current subsidy program and insurance programs that hold that back. Corn and beans are, those are insured. A clover cover crop is not. So corn beans is what pays the bill safely and securely. So, I think the knowledge is out there, and, I think transition to, this is something that we've invested in, right? We've funded research at Kentucky State University to figure out what the best rotations of crops are for a long term. It builds biomass, it stores carbon. Every time you till a field or run a piece of equipment over the field, you're losing carbon. So there are significant values to cover crops, but it's just not incentivized. But we're funding research right now that's based on a 5 to 7 year crop rotation, and some of that is just stuff that's getting turned in to add biomass and nutrients. Some of it's a quick 30-day crop that's allelopathic and is going to break up some pests and diseases. So there's a lot of things that cover crops provide in terms of benefit for the land and the soil, but the subsidy programs are just not there to incentivize people to really do that. So the only incentive is a 15 to 20% increase at the wholesale level for being organic or regenerative organic, or whatever the next label is.
Well, it's interesting that cover crops aren't insured, and hemp is more than just a cover crop too. It's a great rotational crop that's also something that can be monetized because there's a demand for it. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. A hemp grain crop is leaving anywhere from 6,000 to 7,000 pounds of residue on the field, right? And that residue in the hemp plant is primarily cellulose, which is primarily carbon, so you're, just growing a grain crop and mulching your residue is a tremendous benefit to your soil. And then you can drill a crop right into the top of it without having to turn the soil over again. So and then the same thing for fiber crops, right? There's a tremendous benefit to it, whether it's just as a quick winter kill crop so that you have a mulch for the next spring, or whether it's a byproduct of your primary crop. There's a tremendous value in it. And the amount of biomass and long taproot allows it to scavenge micronutrients from way down. So, it's a great recycler of nutrients in the soil.
Yeah, and as far as sequestering carbon is concerned, it's right up there with, it's actually more than flax and others that are known for their ability to sequester carbon. So, yeah, it seems like the upside is just tremendous for farmers. So, is there anything else that you think is really important for farmers or legislators to know about what you're doing? And let me ask you this, with the infrastructure that you're investing in, what are some of the specifics?
So we've been investing in, the main one was a dryer this year, which is a dryer it was actually a converted dryer from a hops system. So we can dry large scale amounts of hemp for CBD, but we're also investing in other components of infrastructure like trimmers, long term, we're long on the whole crop, not just CBD, but obviously CBD was the way we're going to monetize a lot of this. And we're looking at, decortication and other aspects down the road that will be able to support sort of that old, hub and spoke farm infrastructure, what we find with the grain silos and guys processing grain. That's what their wave is and is moving towards.
That's fantastic. And then what about supply chain assistance?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm going to jump in on that, even though it's not my lane, because I do want to add another another big portion of what we've invested in is technology that provides an extra layer of security for our farmers. We have Dr. Voigt working for us on an analytics program that includes multi-spectrum lighting, drones reading back data that pre-spots fungus or insects or moisture issues. Also helps monitor the crops on a regular basis, and that does feed directly into the supply chain, because then all of that data is fed up in from seed to all of those thermal images, and then to all of the test results for the soil and the crops, and then it goes to Trent's side, tagged and bagged, ready for his supply chain story. That's all I've got.
Yeah, so we're really building a complete end-to-end track and trace system, which is going to be, right now is not the requirement, but we're just, because that's the industry, we came from the food industry, a lot of us, we understand where it's going, and so we're trying to, leapfrog that and get ahead of that to be compliant before any FDA sort of rulings. But we are really excited about everything that Dr. Voigt's doing in the supply chain, as well as Mike's team and mine.
I heard a puppy.
Guilty.
No worries. So tell me about Dr. Voigt.
Yeah, Doctor. We recently just hired Dr. Brian Voigt from the Gund Institute of Ecology and Economics. He's a multispectral analytics doctor. He works on imaging, data collection. He's really, really lucky to have him. He runs all of our quality control testing programs, but his primary specialty is in multispectral mapping and imaging and data analysis.
That sounds pretty interesting. So when you're talking about all of that, is this for outdoor and indoor crops or just indoor crops?
No, this is all outdoor. Our drones are equipped with multi-spectrum cameras, so they see light at different frequencies. And when we adjust certain frequencies of light, we're able to spot different things in the field, like it creates a different color image, and then that image gives us information. That image then gets turned into, well, this is, a water leak, or this is botrytis in the field, or this is a corn earworm starting to develop. And it's all based on what spectrums of light they set the cameras to.
That is absolutely fascinating. I haven't heard of this. And I suppose that for hemp that's being grown for medicinal purposes, for CBD, that would be an incredibly important tool.
We certainly think so, yes. It gives us complete track and trace, both for the consumer side and from the regulatory and compliance side, right? I mean, our consumers are then, directly connected back to the farm because it's embedded in our tracking system.
Wow, what an incredible tool. So I learned something really important here. Thank you for that. And then with that information, then you can start to establish protocols for mitigating some of the problems. Do you help with that as well?
Yes, we have a complete set of production protocols. We're essentially, our model is very similar to how the tobacco used to work. We have guys that will come out and visit the farms regularly. We have production protocols that will be controlled from a third wave hub, so to speak, that will notify farmers when they're supposed to do a certain, say we're fertigating, we're going to fertilize on this day, we're going to fertilize this much per acre. They'll be able to take images and send those images to us, and we'll be able to analyze pests. Something shows up. So we've built a pretty clean communication system to help keep farmers safe and secure in their production.
So what would be the advantages of using hemp as opposed to GMO corn for feedstock for livestock?
Well, I'll let Trent weigh in on the nutrition side, but just from a production side, number one, it would produce less methane because the cattle can actually digest the hemp seed. And then, the other larger reaching impact would be that less corn and soybean would be grown, which is one of the biggest issues we have today. And I'll let Trent weigh in on the nutrition side because he's smarter than I am at that point.
Well, I think from a protein standpoint, hemp byproduct, hemp meal is very attractive for both dairy and for animal feed across the board. The problem has always been it's cost prohibitive at this point compared to competitor products, largely because of that other issue we talked about earlier, which is infrastructure. A byproduct of processing, corn and soy, they can produce metric tons a minute on that type of material where, hemp, we just don't have that infrastructure in play yet. So it's starting, and we're doing some interesting things around that with the USDA, but it's going to take more time. And again, if we come into a new space where there's potential winners already that are going to become losers because of hemp, then it's going to be a heavy lift. But we feel like it's definitely worth exploring and worth driving that.
And how do you, back to the supply chain, with some of the uses of hemp, people who are growing it for CBD, obviously there's a tremendous leftover byproduct or scraps and that sort of thing. I mean, are you educating people about how to use some of that waste product, or it wouldn't even be waste product, really? I mean, if they're growing hemp for CBD, for example, then you've got large portions of the plant that are not being used in the CBD supply chain. How do you have them make use of the entirety of the plant if that's what they're specifically growing it for?
Well, the answer is we mow it in and add it back to the soil. And that is simply just a function of there's not enough weight. An acre of CBD is going to have 1,500 to 2,000 plants in it. So it doesn't become cost effective to move it off the field because there's not enough biomass there. There's probably 200 to 300 pounds of biomass that can be extracted from that field. So we just mulch it back in and put it in as a soil amendment. We save money on our fertilizer. So, I guess that's still economic value for our farmers, but we've never found a valuable enough use for the amount of weight that's in there to justify the fuel expense of hauling it off, if that makes sense.
Yeah, from the extraction standpoint, so post farming into processing, you do see some waste product coming off the extraction side. That would be your gums and waxes, small amounts of meal. But at this point on the meal side, it's not approved for animal feed at this point, but it's moving in that direction. The gums and waxes and lipids that are coming off the plant have complete viable uses in, soap, detergent, a lot of different applications there. So, from our standpoint, we're looking at some of those, aftermarkets and determining where we can keep adding value for the farm supply chain on that side. And we've got some interesting opportunities there, but nothing fully developed.
And are there enough companies that are using that excess biomass after the extraction to make detergents and soaps and things like that? I mean, how are you encouraging people to get into using that hemp or biomass in their production of those kinds of consumables?
It's really the same process that we did with CBD. So we start by going out and identifying those markets, developing those markets, and understanding what kind of relationships we can make. I know Mike's got a great relationship with Dr. Bronner's. They've certainly led the way in that industry. So the more sort of aftermarket companies we can build relationships like that with to do something with these byproducts is just going to continue to support, our overall objective, which is to build value into the supply chain for farmers.
Yeah. I interviewed David Bronner about 3 years ago, actually, and what they're doing with hemp, and they've sort of been leading the way long before hemp legislation was even a twinkle in anyone's eye.